invasive species in CamEO. So we have two talks in this session. The first will be delivered by Mike Foley of Cam Valley Forum, looking at the control of floating pennywort, and the second by Vince Lee, who will be looking at the control of American mink. So Mike, I'm going to present your slides if that is okay with you, and if you can talk to them as I go.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Floating pennywort, it's a scourge on the River Cam and many other watercourses, and I see now Norfolk Broads are in great danger. A linear growth of 16 centimeters a day is tremendous, and that is just one of these stolons growing out each one 16 centimeters a day, and that is mid-October. It seems to grow until November, and even then, if you get a warm December day, it will grow a little bit more. It doesn't get killed unless there's really severe frost. So it's there all winter in most watercourses. Management practice is to clear it for navigation, flood control, and that probably is best for some watercourses. But I think the policy should be that if we can, we should eradicate it, or at least try to suppress it naturally, and that's where biological control would come in. Next slide, please. Phosphate and nitrate are known to enhance it. It can grow much stronger at higher levels. You can't see these slides very well, but I've put some upper limits of phosphorus and nitrate on, and they're 0.1 milligrams per litre of phosphorus in the water, and you can see that at Cambridge, at Cove Fen, above which we had particularly bad pennywort, our phosphate levels are just way too high, and for nitrate as well. And in combination, and especially the phosphate, just end up with stronger, better, faster growing pennywort. Next. What we have here is an example where we have an extremely important Ramsar site at the Ouse Washland, which is under threat. We mustn't ignore that. The Erith Sluice was one point where pennywort has been seen to collect. This was about a year ago, 2 years ago. And for bits which get trapped in the struts, which I noticed, a lot more must have passed through into the River Delf. I also found it in the New Bedford River. And of course, these are supposed to flood into the washlands sideways. Let's hope that in the rush of the flow that most of it goes down river to the sea, but you can't be sure. So it's important to be able to monitor these sites, get it at the beginning rather than find that there's an insurmountable problem later on. Next one. So we need to search for new outbreaks, and that's not necessarily totally new outbreaks, but where you think you've eradicated it, you need to keep going back, and again, you go back in order to ensure that there hasn't been a hidden piece which is exploding into growth again. Some watercourses you can do a lot of walking, and that's where you need trained people or people with photographs and using iRecord to monitor. But where you've got tall marginal plants, you can't see into the watercourses, you need a canoe. Perhaps it might be a professional or a volunteer. Drones, I think, could be very useful. CVF have been looking at satellite imagery. Just a few years ago, we looked at the Google Map Landsat and tried to relate it to the pennywort we could see, and other plants as well, even duckweed. And the resolution is so poor, and plant color on the pictures, it was just ambiguous. But we're now looking at Copernicus. It's got 7 spectral ranges, and it might be that one of these, or a combination of these ranges, will produce an image which will give us a spotlight on a patch, maybe a patch 10 meters by 10 meters, which will be brilliant. We could then sort of quickly go in, locate it, and get rid of it before it develops any further. And I'm thinking of any watercourse, but especially the washlands again. Next slide. So if we're going to work all together, we need to start with the big boys. This is the Berkey with the conveyor belt, takes out huge amounts and then it's deposited on the bank elsewhere. Next slide. And then we have the conver type of weed boat. This is the Cook's backwater at the Ouse, totally smothered in Pennywort, and what a good job it does. It can lift it out in quite large amounts per day. You need an experienced operator. Next one. You can see here the conver, and it's lifting onto the bank. Unfortunately, you have to rattle it up and down a few times and shake it around to just lodge everything onto the bank, and inevitably small bits get taken back. I mean, when you have large amounts such as here, it does drag back into the water, and you can see here there's a ribbon of very fine winter type Pennywort where the leaves are quite small, not very vigorous, and you can find this scattered around, well, scattered occasionally or more frequently right along the area where somebody has been working. Next slide. So for the Ouse particularly, but for any area, for the Ouse particularly, we've got Rivercare EA initiative, RU Pennywort Alert. Lindsay Stafford of Rivercare has produced a poster, and she would like to find volunteers to go out and take out canoes and also do bank walking, find outbreaks where they think they have eradicated it, and also try to further reduce it so that there is a target of eradication. Two reasons really. We don't want Grafham Water to get Pennywort at the Offords, and also there's the washlands to consider. Next slide. So this is winter, Grantchester Meadows on the Cam, just above Cambridge. This is the winter mats, which become these larger mats later on in the season. Next one. So we did have a working party, the very first one, raking out from the branches that were overhanging or coming up from the water. And it was pretty dismal, lowered our morale, because we could see that we weren't just getting in there to take it out. And of course, if you leave 1 2 centimetre piece, it'll just grow into a huge mat again. So you have to get rid of everything. Next one. So in that same year, the Canoe Club joined us. They came in when the Pennywort was at a very high level. They very difficult to work when you have Pennywort in such dense mats, many tons in that picture there. So next slide. So what we did was contract out work using funding, especially from the EA and Cambridge Water, cut back the branches, cut the branches out of the water and suckers. And as we cleared it, there was no hiding space left for the Pennywort for the next season. Also, it all cleared away. We had quite a high flow that February, and everything got swept away. And of course, what happens further downriver? Well, we had a boom. You can't really do anything like this unless you actually capture the stuff, and you don't want to give it to the downstream part of the river. Next one. So you can't really see, but the policy after the big removal is to take out any small strands or small mats left, and this requires very persistent and careful work, slow moving. So we have, next one, yes, thank you. So then having, we think, eradicated it over several kilometres from Grantchester down to Bates Bight Lock, we then go down, further down the lower Cam with canoes. Next, these are volunteers from the Canoe Club. And this is where coordination needs to be really planned. You want to have Tom Larnick from the Cam Conservators with his conver, taking out mats just before the volunteers come in. If there's any delay between the big removal and the volunteers coming in, then the small ribbon mats, sorry, the small ribbon strands become too large again, and the canoe volunteers just have a struggle to do anything. Next one. It's important also to recognize that finding volunteers is difficult, and if you can find a company that's conservation minded, you can get a whole load of people in one go, and they can be very useful on one particular job. These were bank rakers in this particular situation, plus one canoeist, which worked brilliantly for quite a wide and bulked up ditch. Next one. So the other thing to consider is that along the rivers we have private moorings. Not all the owners understand Pennywort, or in the past all they did was just to simply take a boat with a big rake and they just pushed it into the river. So that's why we'd see very large mats floating further down sometimes. So if we can educate the owners, they can use various ways to get rid of the Pennywort themselves, and then at the end of the day the volunteers come in and scoop out the remnants, and the volunteers, I think, need to be there for some time afterwards to support these people. Next one. What we found, I think, after several years of work now, is that we should be switching to winter work. This is a reed bed with so much Pennywort in, you couldn't start working with rakes or canoes. And of course, in the breeding season for birds, you couldn't go in there anyway. Winter reed beds with smatterings of winter mats in can be actually raked out. And if, depending on the bank, the silt depth, whether or not you're whether or not the water level has risen or fallen according to floods, you have to choose your time to get into reed beds, but they can be successfully cleared as far as we can see so far from this winter work this year. Next one. Some banks are more amenable to bank work with rakes, but even these tall marginal plants were okay to peer over. It takes longer to walk along, of course, so you can't do much in a day. But if we have, imagine these marginal plants in the summer, of course you can't see a thing from the bank. That's where the canoes are so important, and they can peer under the overhanging marginal plants to find those smaller pieces, which take some, which may be delayed in growth and will show up later on. This smooth bank with a revetment is brilliant for bank raking and for canoes, but of course, where the revetments are broken and it's low lying behind it, you can have all sorts of problems with muddy areas. You can get the Pennywort entrenched in the mud, and some of the stolons can go down. Well, I found some that go into the mud 30 centimeters. So you think that you've actually scraped off with a rake or you've pulled out with your hand as much stolon as there is, but there's still some deeper. And it does seem that it does have enough vigor to come back again once or twice, but you have to keep going back to these broken revetments. And of course, in the summer, these are hidden if they're small patches, maybe 1 meter, 2 meters long. That's why winter work, I'm finding, is so much better. Next one. You can work in the rivers if you're safe and it's deep enough. Of course, the idea is to have canoes supporting the bank rakers, but it's not always possible. And the next one is, sorry, this one is an ideal bank. In the summer, you wouldn't be able to bank rake, but in the winter, you can do an awful lot of activity there. Next one. One important thing, when you're all working together, different organizations, you may even have contractors, as this last winter, funded by the EA in a boat, going down with rakes, getting out, going into ditches. They've been tremendously helpful, working alongside us in Cam Valley Forum this winter. But it's important, this is a volunteer working. It's important to actually make a diary of where you've been, especially when you're looking for outlying Pennywort in ditch work. Not always connected to the river, but obviously if it is connected, it's more likely to have it. it gets into the ditches when the Pennywort is bulked, and then there is a reservoir to come back into the river later on. And we do suspect, even if you do have it in unconnected ditches, there are situations where birds can carry it back into the river. So this is what I did for, oh, there's Bottisham Lock there and Clay Hythe and things. This is what I have as my memory of the weeks. We did about 10 weeks work and 10 events, just a pair of bank rakers. And we had 1 or 2 canoes out. Next one. Oh, right. So what do you do if you have rivers that are isolated miles away from populations? Canoe clubs might be enthused to go out for a day, but really for canoeing, you need to have several days of work, several events. One event isn't going to be enough, and certainly the events need to coordinate with the big boys. Glyphosate has its place, though we haven't been using it on the CAM recently. Well, CAM Valley Forum have never used it. And the other aspect is to look forward to biological control. The weevil Listerionotus elongatus is the key biological control agent that CABI is looking at. They seem to have stalled a little in the last year or two. I think they've been asked by DEFRA to do more. They've been doing robust host susceptibility tests, but I think DEFRA has asked them to do more. It's still just to make sure that the weevil doesn't sort of fly off from the Pennywort and get into carrot crops or other plants that we value in the environment. So we've got biological control, which might certainly have its place in suppressing the Pennywort in areas where it needs to be managed below a damaging level, but it'll never eradicate it. But I think from our point of view, and I suppose I'm looking rather blinkered in a way because of the Cambridge area, I think we've managed to getting to the stage of eradicating it over 14 kilometers of the CAM, which is a fair distance. But I do understand that it can't be eradicated everywhere. So I think in the future, eradication management needs to be very carefully tailored, needs to be targeted. The EA practice to clear for navigation and flood control may be the only way forward for some years, for some other areas. But if we can get the weevil in, and it does work, and it brings it down to low levels, then all the better. So final slide. This was a draft slide which got in, as well as water companies being within our little team. We're working together. I should also put in agriculture. Of course, agriculture is an important, very important source of phosphorus and nitrogen, which we don't want at the high levels we have in our local rivers. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was excellent. I'm just going to pick up a couple of questions there and mentions in the comments just before we move to Vince's presentation, because Will Cranston pointed out some interesting research from CABI on the azolla and the biological control of floating Pennywort. So a link to that is in the chat if people are interested. And a quick question for Mike is from Ellie Beach. So what do we do with the piles of vegetation on the banks after the works? Does it regrow if it gets re-wetted again, like crassula?
If you take it out in the winter, you ought to get it removed at least 3 meters away. But as you could see in one of the slides, the conver weed boats cannot actually physically get it so far from the bank, and it does fall back in. It takes a few weeks in the winter. It can take 3 months actually, a huge pile in the winter to rot down, but eventually it does. There's no other way. When you see large amounts being taken out, the amount of tonnage in the bulk is so great, you can't really physically do anything else but leave it on the bank. But if you're working as a volunteer, you've got more flexibility. You can move it away from the bank that much better, and you just hope that the whole area doesn't flood a few weeks later. Push it back again. And of course, it's illegal to move it away unless you do it in controlled conditions. I think you'd have to be a professional. You're not supposed to move it away from the point where you took it out, roughly.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike. So, Vince, I'm now sharing your presentation, so feel free to give yourself a brief introduction. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yep. Is it possible for me to control the mouse on the screen for everyone, just in case I need to point to anything?
I can. Can you share your screen?
Yep. I'm not quite sure where we are now.
If you click on the big green share screen at the bottom middle of your Zoom screen, you should be able to share your slides.
Oh,
here.
yeah, and then hit share. Yep, we're there. Okay.
Great.
Cool. Right, that's better. Yep, thank you very much. Okay. Is that presenting okay for everybody?
Yes, thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, thank you very much, Sam. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all about the work that the other WRE are doing, which is Water Life Recovery East. We came up with our name before we'd heard of Water Resources East, unfortunately, but we kind of stuck with it. And our strapline is a mink-free East Anglia. So that is basically what we're there to do, is to get rid of mink from East Anglia. So I work for the Countryside Restoration Trust. We're one of the partners of Water Life Recovery East, which we'll come to in a bit. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is mink, basically, this is their first pick from the buffet of wildlife along the riverbanks, is the water vole. And the water vole, as we know, is one of our most rapidly declining native mammal species. Various sort of levels of decline, but however you measure it, it's going rapidly from most of the country. But once mink have eaten these, they just continue to occupy the same riverbanks and environments and feed on a wide range of anything else they can get hold of. So for those who aren't familiar with the abilities of mink, this sequence of photos from a Scottish sand martin colony just shows their absolute incredible predatory behavior. So the first slide, the first image shows the tail and the back feet of a mink going into a sand martin tunnel. And here it is looking out afterwards. You can see the scratches of the claws where it's climbed up. And that is the size of probably a female mink, I suspect, that's fitted into that tunnel, eaten the contents, whether that's the adult sitting bird, chicks, the eggs, whatever's in there, turned around and come back out again. So it can do that in a sand martin tunnel, it can do that in a water vole tunnel, but it will also take much larger prey than itself in the same way that other mustelids will tackle things much bigger than they are. So they'll feed on rabbits in the wintertime and rats and anything else. Fish as well is a major part of their diet, and crayfish. So they really do take whatever they can get in the water environment. So we've got a next slide. Let's see if this goes. Yeah. Okay, so the solution is to kill the mink. Simple as that. But many people have been killing mink for many years. You know, they've been established in the UK since the 1950s, really. And there've been one or two plans to try and eradicate them early in the 70s. But basically, most sites protect their site, kill mink, and expect to see mink every year and kill another mink. So just killing mink is an endless task, really, on a site protection level. So you really need to increase the efforts to catchments and regions, really. And we think the final, the real solution will be to eradicate them from Great Britain as an island. So the one tool that's really brought this into the realms of possibility is this box on the back of the mink trap here, which is well, that was a mink police unit. We have other similar remote monitoring devices which can attach to the trap and mean that you can leave a trap running for weeks, months, years with no effort at all, and then as soon as that door closes, you're told about it by the transmitter on the back of this trap, and then you can attend and work out if it's a mink or something else that's gone in the trap. So as I mentioned, we are Water Life Recovery East. We have quite a wide range of diverse interests in the partnership. So I think these names are sort of alphabetical by surname. So ranging from a geneticist in the university through to water management teams, farmers, various conservation bodies, and shooting and fishing interests as well. So we have a good spectrum of people who are all concerned with the same problem, and based across the whole of East Anglia. So we have myself in Cambridgeshire, we have the Hertfordshire and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, we have the Essex Wildlife Trust, the Norfolk Rivers Trust, and so on and so on. And that is the sort of one image that shows this sort of the plan in summary, really. So as I said, we really need to consider Great Britain as an island and look at this invasive species at the whole island level, because unlike the plants, it will cross over dry land quite happily and recolonize catchments. But to prove the efficacy of an eradication at that scale, we're really looking at a very large scale land eradication. And so we've chosen this area of East Anglia, and in particular the core zone, which is Norfolk and Suffolk, or eastern Norfolk, eastern Suffolk, with the North Sea as a boundary. So the idea is that we will eradicate mink from this entire area as a breeding species and prove that concept within the core. So we think that mink can probably travel about 60 kilometers, which is the width of the buffer here. So if a mink is born here in Northamptonshire or Bedfordshire or Hertfordshire, at some point during our project, it has very limited chance of getting to the core, because we intend to have an entire network of mink traps throughout the buffer. And likewise, there'll be an entire network of mink traps within the core, which will be trapping mink all the time. And potentially within perhaps 3 to 5 years, we would be in a position to look for the absence of mink. Proof of absence is one of the hardest things to do in wildlife, of course. So we're looking at things like eDNA and camera traps and sniffer dogs and various other detection methods, as well as just general reporting and keeping traps running continuously after we think we've caught the last one, to see if we have a 12-month period with no mink within the core. And if that is successfully demonstrated, then we will go straight to making the case for a Great Britain eradication without hesitation, really. So we're in the first really full year of this scaling up. We were lucky enough to get nearly £250,000 from the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which started at the beginning of this year. And that meant that we've employed extra people across 3 of the counties. So myself and an assistant in Cambridgeshire and 2 new staff in Norfolk and Suffolk, and working with lots of volunteers and other groups, and lots of additional support from other funding options. And we've really scaled up our efforts at pace really this year. The number of staff required is pretty low, actually. You know, 1 staff equivalent per county will probably manage a large network of mink traps, but we do need to have continuous coverage. So those traps can be entered on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, New Year's Day, Easter Sunday, Easter Monday, whatever. So you need to have somebody on standby to act as backup for any trap on any day. Most of the trap attendance will be done by volunteers, but we feel that we should have at least 1 person who's sort of responsible to make sure that the volunteer is aware of what's going on and will get to the trap in time. Obviously, counties vary in size, so you might need between 100 and 200 mink rafts across the county, each one costing about £250 each. But once they're installed, they have a very low running cost and a long life, so they are good value for money. and quite a cheap sort of project, really, considering the benefits that might come from it. So just to quickly introduce you to the smart trap, just to show you this slide again. So the mink raft, which is the black plastic object at the background there, was developed by the Game and Wildlife Trust a good nearly 20 years ago. It has a tunnel on top, which is enough to attract mink to just enter and have a look around. And if the cage trap is permanently in there, they will tread on that treadle, the door will slam, the magnet will be pulled off the back of this unit, and a text and an email will be sent to everybody who needs to know instantly as well. So we can get there quite quickly. So that's how it works. And they will sit patiently, and we let the mink do the running, really. So we had the original design that the Game and Wildlife Trust came up with was to have these mink rafts spaced about 1 kilometre apart, and when there was no trap in there, you would have a clay pad in there. So you check your clay pad every couple of weeks. If you saw some footprints, you'd put a trap in, and then you'd have to look at it every day, because the law demands that a live catch trap is checked daily. This trap is checked every minute, so that's well above the legal requirement. And by eliminating that use of the clay, we just basically mean that we are, the first time a mink goes in there, it's caught. So it's just more efficient, and a lot less visits required. You don't have to go once a week to look at clay. You just go once whenever there's something in there. And central to this whole scheme is that we keep lots and lots of data. So if anyone does see or know of a mink, we need to know about it. So check our website or get in touch with me if you do hear of a mink or find a dead one on the road or anything like that. Every event is going to be logged, so we have a really central database to sort of make sure that we work out exactly how much effort has gone into the pilot project that we're doing now to eradicate in East Anglia, and we can work out the scale that's required for the whole of Great Britain from that. And each mink, where possible, is being genetically sampled as well, so that we can look at how far individuals have travelled from their birthplace. And if we find a cohort of juveniles in the autumn and recognise the DNA of the female, we'll know when we catch that female that we've eliminated it. If we don't find that female in our captures, we know that there's one that we need to look for in an area that's perhaps missed. So this map here is particularly where I needed to use the cursor. This is a sort of base map of Cambridgeshire with the rivers, the main rivers on there. My initial project, I started this about 2010, 2011 on this little stream here, the Bourne Brook. And I caught something like 40 to 50 mink in the first winter on that stream. These dots are where the currently active mink traps are. Then around here we have the rest of the upper cam, which I sort of increased my area to work in that in the first 4 or 5 years of my operation. We're now, obviously, as you can see, covering most of the county. So we have quite a few on the ooze and the ooze washes and in the fens and around the Nene. But if you see an area that doesn't seem to have a dot and you have access to that, and you can provide us with the contact details, we'd love to know. You know, we're filling in gaps all the time. And we really need access to sites at about 5 or 6 mile intervals. Probably will do for most rivers, I think. So this is a base map, again the same map, but with dots proportional to the size of the captures for 2020 on the left and 2021 so far on the right. As you can see, we've scaled up the efforts this year, so we've already caught more than we caught last year. But I always look at that and think, well, that's about the number I caught in my first winter on one stream. So, you know, we really have got the mink scared, I think, at the moment. And the ones that we are catching now are probably traveling a long way to find new territories and look for mates at this time of year. So we're fairly confident that there will be very, very few mink breeding in Cambridgeshire this year already in just the first year of this big scale up. So as I said, we rely a lot on volunteers. So this photo shows my assistant Emily just training up 2 volunteers, the chaps in the sort of middle of the image there, and at the background, the lady who's kindly given us access to her bit of river. She has a boat mooring on the Lark here. So all of the 3 people in the background are sort of volunteering their either access or their time. The 2 chaps will be available on any occasion when the mink trap here closes. There will be one or other of them will be there with their gun to dispatch a mink if necessary. But the lady who lives nearby will visit first and just check what it is in there. So we've had 1 activation at this site since it was installed a month ago, and that was probably a fast boat causing wash to rock the mink raft up and down and cause the trap to close with nothing in it. So she could look at that, reset it for us, and very little effort. The trap is now back open and ready for the next visitor, whatever that might be. So yeah, that is the project that we're working on. I'm happy to take any questions, but please, if you do think of a river near you where you could have a mink raft, or if you would be prepared to act as a volunteer dispatcher, responder. If you don't have a gun, we can provide you with a gun, that's fine. If you don't want to use a gun, and I know a lot of us don't, it's still useful to have people who can visit and just confirm the contents of the trap, so that we can send somebody who may have to come from further afield to check a trap. But ideally, we want people who are prepared to do a dispatch. I think the number of traps that we have now is nearly 100, and we've caught just over 50 mink this year. So we're not looking at many mink per trap from now on, I don't think. So in Cambridgeshire, certainly we're probably getting a decline in capture rate now, even though we're increasing the number of traps. So that's the case there. But I know in Norfolk, they're particularly keen to get some traps on the Wissey and that catchment. So if anyone's calling in from Norfolk, that would be great to hear from you as well, or Suffolk or Essex indeed. Okay, thank you. Let's stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Vince. So if everyone would like to set their questions in the chat, and seeing a few come through now. So from Rachel Brown, so do you get much concern or trouble from animal rights activists who object to any sort of animal culling? Is this a sensitive area?
Very little. We have had one in South Suffolk, I think, where the Essex and Suffolk hunt saboteurs put on their Facebook how proud they were of finding one of these mink rafts which they destroyed. So we're trying to talk to them and explain, the conservation benefits, but some people will obviously always object to that. But generally, then we site them in fairly discreet locations. I mean, we don't want to upset people with the site of dispatching mink, and we don't want them interfered with, so we do try to locate them fairly discreetly, mostly on private land. But so far we haven't had any sort of negative comments directed at us. Just one incident.
Thank you. So are you getting many other animals caught in the traps, and presumably these released on capture?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. In the initial phases, it's almost 100% mink. And that just shows how much they dominate the waterscape in that way. So the biggest dots you saw on the map, we've had 22 mink on that site near the River Ouse and nothing else. But after a few years, you do start to see more bycatch, so water voles. We had our first water vole in North Cambridge last weekend. And of course, they are released straight away. And that's one of the advantages of the smart trap, is that you can get there pretty quickly. So that was at the bottom of somebody's garden. I managed to get them on the phone about 8 o'clock, and they put a dressing gown on and had a look and they let it out. So that we know that trap was activated at 4:20 a.m. So that water vole had a little 4-hour incarceration, but there were no water voles there when we started trapping there sort of 5 years ago. So yeah, a little bit of bycatch. We've had stoats, water rails, moorhens, but they're far in the minority compared to mink.
So a question from Ellie Beach: what type of gun do you use, and do you need to have a license?
You don't need a license. We use air weapons. So the image I showed has an air pistol, and ideally we use an air rifle, which just means you can stand further back and use that. So that they're a small pellet. We try to use lead-free pellets, and yeah, it's a fairly high power, but at the limit, below the limit for which you require a license air rifle.
So is the plan to expand across the country beyond the trial and buffer zone?
What about the plan? Is that
so sorry, is the plan to expand across the country?
Yes. So we've already been talking to the Invasive Non-Native Species Secretariat and government ministers about this, and they're pretty supportive. I think it would be a useful tool to put into the environmental land management scheme as a sort of thing that could be rolled out across the country quite easily. But yes, the idea is that Great Britain is an island, and you can envisage a day when that would be mink free. So there's big projects already underway in the Highlands of Scotland and parts of the southwest of England and various other spots as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So have you come across evidence of otter displacing mink from waterways at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what's happened, otters did make a good recovery, and mink numbers went down, which a lot of people thought that the mink were being driven out by otters. On the Bourne Brook, where I started mink trapping in 2010, otters were first seen in 1994. So they've been coexisting for at least 15 years together. And we were very lucky that the Wildlife Trust did a full riparian mammal survey of that brook from the start of the trapping till 2019. Otter signs basically increased when you got rid of mink. So the two species coexist. They probably share quite a large amount of diet in common. So if you've got 40 mink eating crayfish and fish in a brook, then you won't have as many otters as you would if you have no mink eating all the fish and crayfish in the brook. So actually they kind of rub along each other, but fewer mink mean more otters.
Excellent. So are you working in partnership with other mink eradication groups across the region?
Yeah, so we've tried to contact everybody we know in East Anglia who's working on this. So that's the RSPB, the Wildlife Trusts, the Rivers Trusts, yeah, and various game organisations. So yeah, that is the whole point. Yeah, we talk to each other all the time. We have the steering group meets about 6 times a year, representing all those different bodies. But if anyone out there is doing this and hasn't made contact with us, we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And is there such thing as a typical mink habitat? And if so, what is it?
Water with small food in it. They'll go in duck ponds. I mean, they seem to prefer slightly wooded riverbanks, but you get them in fenland drains, you get them in large gravel pits, you get them in very small streams, yeah, everything in between. So, and also coastal as well. So I've been talking to the people who are doing this in Argyll on the small seabird islands, and they'll swim out 3 kilometers to a seabird island and eat all the tern chicks and then swim back again. So yeah, anywhere. They are amazing animals. I really wish we could live with them, but yeah, they've got to go back to America.
Brilliant. Well, that's the end of the questions, and it's about time that we move on to our next presentation. So thank you very much, Vince and Mike, for your contributions there.